Hello, my name's Hartmut Günther. I'm fortunate enough to facilitate mindfulness classes here in Armidale, New South Wales. This is a series of recordings of actual live interactive classes that we've held, and this is the second recording of the series. And in these recordings, we focus on a particular aspect of mindfulness. The aspect we focus on is actually chosen by members in the class. And this particular aspect of mindfulness is listening. So I hope you enjoy listening to this particular episode. Thank you. Why don't we just go around the group, maybe starting with Graham, since he brought this up. Listening. What are your thoughts about listening, Graham? Good, bad, indifferent, crazy, whatever. Go.
Struggle with. I tend to drift a lot. It's hard for me to remain focused, I've noticed, and I miss out on a lot. Listening to people, I've got to really concentrate because I don't know if I was diagnosed, I was diagnosed with ADD as a kid and then later on again as an adult, but I don't know if I am or not. And they tried me on the two different medications, one when I was a kid and then the other shit when I was in my mid-20s, early 30s. I'm not on anything now, but I still struggle to, I've got 100 thoughts running around at once and trying to carry on a conversation. I've always struggled with that.
Yeah.
So listening, something I've always struggled with. I've got to, it's hard to put everything else out and just focus on that one source of information that I'm trying to absorb sometimes.
Yeah. That is, I've actually, what do you like with reading? Like reading a book?
I can read, I choose not to. I find it difficult to read in the sense that I get halfway down the page and I forget what I'm reading anyway.
Yeah.
And I always struggle a bit with, as far as reading goes, comprehension at school, that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
It takes me a little while. Subjects anyway, I can absorb quickly and understand. But I've never been one to read a novel or, some fictional story just for the hell of it, for leisure.
Yeah.
As such, I've never done it. I hate it. But I'll get 2 or 3 pages, I'll think, fuck, I'll go and do something else.
Yeah, fair enough. Do you like non-fiction, particularly if it relates to something you're interested in?
I read the paper or, I used to, lots of automotive books and all that sort of stuff to extract information from, if I'm trying to study something, but just reading for leisure is something I've never done. My mum's still trying to put me into it. She didn't start till she was in her 50s. And she said it's never too late to try and start reading. She sent me a book last week, but I haven't really touched it yet.
Yeah.
When you...
Sorry, go on.
Yeah, no, I'm saying I've never been a bookworm. Some people sit down and read a book for leisure. I don't do that. I just can't get into it.
When you read the non-fiction, something that you're trying to learn or extract information on out of, are you able to then recall and focus and stay with it for a while?
Yeah, I used to. That ability has deteriorated somewhat as I've grown older and abused the alcohol and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
My general brain function has decreased.
Yeah.
I'm not. So yeah.
Okay. So
something I'm more with today than I used to.
Can you say that again? Yes, I didn't hear that.
It's something that I struggle more with today than I did, say, 20 years ago.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So we're going to actually touch upon those things that you've mentioned. They're common to all of us. The degree to which they bother you obviously varies from person to person. One good thing I just want to say is that you haven't just blindly accepted the diagnosis of ADHD. I'm not saying that isn't something that's being investigated and isn't real and all that sort of stuff. It's just that there's it becomes a problem when you just accept a label, and then the problem associated with accepting a diagnosis or a label is that then you become lazy and you don't do anything about it. You have chosen not to do that, and you're interested in doing something about it, particularly since you're aware that you've even identified that you've got an issue, you've got a problem, in the sense that it's difficult for you to listen. So I just wanted to say that's fantastic. Good on you. So also in today's class, I sat down and I prepared today's class yesterday, and nearly everything that you've mentioned is included in what we're going to be speaking about today that I've got. Hopefully you can take something from that, and I'll come back and focus on some of the things that are relevant to you, Graham, as we go through and talk about it. So thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah.
Michael, and what's your take on listening? How do you?
Yeah, I really think I've had poor listening skills. I could hear what people say, but my communication skills weren't very good. I never looked them in the face and really paid attention to what they were saying. And more than ever, with coronavirus and having communication through text and stuff like that, I realise how poor I've been. As in when you can't see someone's face and you can't hear their tone of voice, and I suppose it's hard if someone's struggling with something to show empathy with a text message.
Yeah.
It's not communicating with them. And yeah, that's made me more aware of how poor I was at actually listening to what people say.
That's quite a good point that I didn't even think of, but you just reminded me of it. It's so interesting that as human beings, we get, when someone's speaking, like I'm speaking right now, you're also getting visual cues, as you were just mentioning, like how is the person, what's the body language, how are they moving around, do they feel tense, do they look tense, is, as you said, also not just the words that are coming out of the mouth, but how are the words coming out of the mouth? Is there some tension there? Are they feeling down? Like, I know I've heard myself when I'm down, my voice gets lower, I get slower. It's almost monotonous, sends you to sleep. So you're right, all of that stuff goes on. So, but you said an interesting thing. You said that you don't, in the past, I don't know if you still do that, you didn't look at people while they were speaking so much. And do you know why that might be?
Self-confidence, probably, or busy doing something, too self-centered into what I was doing. If, for argument's sake, say it was a work situation, and sometimes in family situations too.
Yeah. Good point. There's a lot of opportunity to grow. That's why I love this subject, mindfulness, so much. Just open up and discover more about ourselves. So it's interesting because other people, when we interact, and if you could think about this more as we go on, that even though sometimes you might feel uncomfortable in interacting with another person, but really what's happening is that person is presenting a mirror to you. Now, obviously, there's many levels of communication that are going on when two people are interacting and they're communicating and they're talking. But one of the things that happens is that we get a chance to feel how we're feeling in that situation. And that is brought about because the other person is acting as a mirror. And I don't mean that in some metaphysical sense. I just mean that that's how we're wired in. And if you're aware enough, mindful enough in the situation, and you find yourself communicating with someone, talking with someone, and you start feeling uncomfortable, well, that's good that you can be aware of that. But rather than keep hiding, maybe do something different in that instance when you're feeling uncomfortable. And initially, like all aspects of learning new skills and learning more about ourselves, I mean, it may not work that well, but all I can say is that unless you're with some serial killer or some psychopath, we have a lot that we can share with each other that's beautiful and useful. So, so if you're here on this planet with all of us, the 7 billion of us or more, let's get comfortable with each other. That's what I'm trying to say. So, and sometimes that's a lifetime learning to actually be able to do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Thanks, Michael. Brad, any feedback, any input on listening?
I find I can listen if something interests me. I'm a good listener if I haven't got shit going on, like that stresses me out. If I'm stressed out, I'm a very poor listener.
Yep.
I can't concentrate or focus on listening. So
Yeah.
But yeah, I like listening and learning as much as I can.
That's great.
All depends what sort of frame of mind I'm in or the situation. I noticed when I was on driving set that I was a very poor listener and a selective era. So I didn't want to listen to anything, but I just block it out sort of thing.
Yeah.
Just in the end sort of. But I try and listen as much as I can with my kids and focus on what they're trying to tell me.
How old are your kids?
I've got a 20-year-old, two 20-year-olds, 13 and a 6-year-old.
Right. That's a nice spectrum. There's enough learning there for you for the rest of your life. That's fantastic. If you can keep the lines of communication open and develop some, I mean, obviously listening is one part of, communication and developing a rapport with someone, but it is an incredibly important part. So thank you for sharing that. And again, like I mentioned with Graham, we've got some of that, exactly those points that you just brought up. They're relevant, and we all experience that at different times. So in regards to, again, just on that theme of someone else acting as a mirror, so I guess you're in here to learn about yourself too and why you even got yourself in this particular situation. So one good thing is that if you are feeling stressed or you're feeling distracted or you're not able to be present, then try to look at, well, why that is. What part of you played to get yourself to that point? We started speaking about that last week as well. So again, learn from how you're feeling and get some, be able to move forward and go deeper into that. Right. Let me pop that little screen up. Did you want to say anything else, Graham, or shall we just move on? And
I've been trying to listen.
Well, based on that, I've tried to make it as interesting as Brad just said. Very hard to listen to something that's not engaging or not interesting. So my job is to make it as engaging, as interesting as possible. So hopefully we won't let each other down there. So let me just bring that up again. And so what I'd actually had planned for today, and sometimes all good plans go pear-shaped, and sometimes a focus on a class may take a week and a half or 2 weeks. So we'll just see how we go. But, and of course, you all know we do a meditation as well. So one thing I thought we could do today is practice some listening. And I've got a little 15-minute talk that we can practice our listening skills. Hopefully you'll find it interesting and enough for you to be able to enjoy your experience of listening. So there's a bit of that. So maybe then in that, because it's nearly 10 o'clock, so I thought, well, mate, let's spend the next 15 minutes just having a discussion and going through. This is, of course, biased. This is what I came up with in regards to what's I've learnt about listening in my life, and also some of the research and some of the evidence. And by the way, I forgot, it's actually next to my bed upstairs. There's a book I've just started reading last night called The Distracted Mind. And I can't even pronounce one of the authors, so I'll bring it in next week. But it's, if you're interested, and Graham, you may be interested, it's a bit techie, but at the same token, it gives some interesting tips and insight into what goes on in our brain when we're distracted. And of course, it's easy to be distracted when you're trying to listen to someone. So that's called The Distracted Mind. And I'll bring that in and give you some more details next week. I just got it recently. I think it was only $20 on the book depository, and I've just started reading it. So there was already a couple of interesting things in there, and I may be able to interweave some of those things in these classes. So first of all, listening versus hearing. And I learnt, well, I've sort of, well, I think we're all pretty much aware of that, but it really goes down deeper. And when I was studying psychology last year, psychology tends to really go, well, a part of psychology called neuropsychology and neuroanatomy and all that sort of stuff, anything to do with the brain, they're trying to figure this stuff out. So here we go. So hearing is a human sense. As long as the ears are working, it is a passive endeavor. So in other words, you can hear things. So that's clear. That's what's going on, as long as your ears are working. When you selectively focus your awareness onto what is being said, then you are listening. The key word, and that actually came up in that book, The Distracted Mind I was reading last night, selective focus, or they use the word selective attention, selectivity. And even Brad mentioned that, selective hearing, which is interesting. So that often has a bad connotation, because if you're a parent, or you've been a child with a parent, which we all have, or you've been in a relationship, you may have been accused of selective hearing. In other words, you only hear what you want to hear. That's not a bad thing. That's just a survival mechanism, but it may not be a good thing in a relationship, or particularly in a family situation, because you're not honoring the relationship to the extent that you could. So you are listening, you're paying attention, an active process that requires effort and presence. So one of the key differences between listening and hearing is effort. So you have to make an effort in being able to quell some of the distractions. And we'll go into that later on, some of those things there. Any comments on that?
No, straight.
No, sounds good.
Make some effort. That's the key. Listening versus hearing. Paying attention to what is being said will significantly enhance your ability to recall later, remember what was said. So, and Graham was already expressing that he can't recall because he's not listening. Or if he's reading, you know, interestingly enough, I'm a slow reader. My partner's a rapid reader. And from what I understand, slow readers basically read it out aloud in their own minds, and that's why they're a slow reader. So I've been like that my whole life. So I can hear myself reading, not aloud, but just in my own thoughts. So if you're drifting off, and it's quite remarkable that you can, on a perception level, just talking about reading, read half a page of a book, only to find yourself all of a sudden waking up from a state where you were thinking about something else. I find that extraordinary that we can even do that. So if you want to, and again, this comes up very strongly in psychology. This is because psychology looks at learning, how we can optimize and maximize learning. Doesn't matter how old we are, you have to keep learning new things, which is obvious in this day and age of coronavirus and everything changing. The caseworker, Sam there, myself, I've had to readapt, relearn new things. Even what I'm doing here with you right now, I've never done before until a month ago. So you have to figure things out. So if you want to remember something, you have to be present, either in reading it or listening to someone, because if it doesn't go into your brain deep enough, it won't be recalled. I mean, just think about it. How many things do you hear during the day, particularly if you listen to the radio or TV or lots of people talking around you? And you sit down at night, and I try to do this every now and then as much as I can, and just spend 10 minutes before I go to bed, maybe have a hot milk and honey or a cup of tea or something. At the moment, sit next to the fire and try to reflect on what can I remember that happened during the day for me. That's an interesting exercise even in itself. And in some ways that reflects how present you've been and how important some of the things and engaging some of the things that have happened to you and what you've participated in, but more so what you've learnt during the day. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah.
So if you want to learn something, you've got to develop that art of listening and being present, and that all of these things can take some time if we haven't been doing that so prevalently. Who saw the Mythbusters episode where they showed that that myth that women can multitask and men can't multitask? Anyone see that?
No.
Yeah. You know what I mean? The show Mythbusters? I don't know if anyone's seen that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. You know, they do all sorts of weird things. But anyway, one day they did that. And then I thought, I saw that years ago. And then that came up again in psychology class as well. And then the bottom line is this: we are not wired to multitask, even though we can create the illusion that we're multitasking, meaning that, and particularly women may be better at, for many reasons, like emotional reasons and other reasons, or maybe that they're just smarter, who knows, to have a baby on one hip, be making something to eat with the other hand, and being able to conduct a phone conversation with someone at the same time. That may give you the impression that that person can multitask. What's actually, though, really happening in the brain is the illusion is created because the brain switches from one activity to another rapidly. So rapidly you don't even know. So switching back and forward between, oh, the baby's there, oh, I better not overfill that bottle, oh, what did that person just say? So backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards. But the reality is you cannot pay attention to two things at once. Anyone dispute that or don't believe that? No. Okay. All right. All right. Why have I got Mrs. Kruger there? I don't know if dear Mrs. Kruger is still on the planet, but she was my maths teacher in year 12. That was a long time ago. One day something happened that all the class found quite extraordinary. She asked someone in the class to give an explanation about a certain formula or some aspect of mathematics. So this person started talking, and she was there, she was listening to that person. All of a sudden there was a knock on the door and it still makes me laugh. And this other person comes in the classroom and starts talking to Mrs. Kruger about something reasonably important. And the person who was giving the answer, the mathematician, stopped talking. And Mrs. Kruger looked at that person who was giving the answer and said, "Oh, don't stop talking. I can listen to two things at once." So I don't think anyone in that class had ever heard anyone make that statement before. So that proceeded to unfold. So the person at the door was talking about what they were talking about, and the person was reciting his answer. This went on for about 30 seconds. And all of us, particularly myself, even though I was sitting at the back of the class, I was just glued to her face. I was just thinking, this is either a miracle unfolding before my eyes, or what is this? Anyway, after about 30 seconds, she fessed up and asked the person who was answering the mathematics question to stop, because obviously she could not do it. It wasn't possible. So many, many years ago, I'd already had a demonstration that, oh, maybe you can't actually do that. Listen to two things at once. So listening while driving or using a mobile phone. That's why there's actually laws in place now, and they actually have cameras to detect if you're talking on a mobile phone while you're driving a car. Now, some of us have obviously done that, and some of us have been naughty, including myself. But more recently, I've become very aware that I'm now no longer making phone calls while I'm driving somewhere, even with headphones on and all that sort of stuff, because I realize my awareness is compromised. My ability to pay attention to my environment, like I will talk on the phone in a conversation with someone, give that a lot of my attention, and before I know it, just like Graham was saying, reading a page of the book, I'm somewhere else and not have been at all aware, entirely automatic, driving the car. Now, you might think that that's all right, but A, you're missing out on what's going on the road, and B, you will not be in a place to respond to an emergency, to something happening outside of your expectations. So, just saying, that's an interesting thing. Listening to your own thoughts while trying to listen to another. Again, Graham was mentioning this. Anyone else had experience of that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So rather than this whole thing, you know, the mindfulness, what we're talking about here is not to admonish or to come down hard and say, well, stop doing that and do this instead. No. The whole point here of mindfulness is to learn about yourself. So if you're listening to your own thoughts while trying to listen to another, and again, this is not going to resolve itself instantly, well, then ask yourself, you might ask yourself, well, why am I doing that? Why is it so important that I have to listen to those thoughts right now? Just simple questions like that to yourself might help you learn more about yourself, and then maybe even be able to change your behavior if you want to do that, or if you think that that's important. But you have to start somewhere. And most of us, I mean, all of us, we're all adults here in this room right now. So, you know, we're not going to take lightly to someone telling us what to do. So the last thing I want to do in a class like this is to tell you what to do. But hopefully, as we weave through and move around that mandala of mindfulness, we can look at some of these things. And the other thing of even bringing these things up, it's not to point the finger and say, well, this is what we're doing wrong, but it's more to raise our awareness and realize that we can change something. We have a lot more power and abilities and strength than we give ourselves credit for sometimes, but we won't know that until we put it into practice. The other one is formulating a response to another person while they are speaking. I have done that a lot in my life. Maybe I'm fortunate enough there because I'm to some degree in a counselling role in my clinic when I'm seeing clients. I realised I had to change. So it actually takes a bit of trust. I mean, when you guys are speaking and I'm listening, I have to just listen. I have to be present and don't try to always formulate my take on what you're saying. I'm not entirely innocent of that by any means. And again, if you're fortunate enough to have a partner, your partner will make you very aware of that if that's what you're doing. So interesting things. So the myth of paying attention to things at one time. Hopefully that's been busted. Anyone doesn't feel it's been busted? Okay. Learning while listening to yourself while speaking. Do I believe what I'm saying? Am I trying to convince someone even though I haven't fully thought it through? Now, I'm sure that all of us, when you speak, you're actually listening to yourself. Maybe you're not all the time, but that's another powerful ability that we have. I tell you, as we go through all these things, they have all these superhero movies, the Marvel comics things. I was thinking about it the other day. And all those superhero type abilities they have, being able to set themselves on fire or, repel someone just with a blink of an eye and all those things. Well, from what I'm starting to understand is that we have incredible super capabilities, but you won't know that until you become aware of them more and practice them more. So one of the things that we can do is actually learn while listening to ourselves while we're speaking. Are we talking bullshit? How would you know? You could know that, as Michael was saying, from reading someone's body language. They'll tell you. Everyone has an inbuilt bullshit detector in them. So, what was that?
No, just laughing.
All right. So, so that's just one example I'm trying to say. But of course, there's a more deeper version of that as well. So, however, we can learn by listening to ourselves when we try to articulate something difficult or new. In many ways, that's why I'm encouraging you to express yourselves in these classes, not to showcase how much you know or how fantastic you are or anything like that, but trying to make some effort to put into words, which has probably been very difficult to put into words. And we all do that in a different way at a different time. So, and I call that discovery through expression. So does that make sense, or anyone want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think it makes sense.
It's a bit, in some ways, it's a bit subtle, but you, again, some of the things I'm mentioning may not resonate with you. and that's completely fine. And that is because you haven't been able to be in a situation where you apply that or try that. And maybe you have tried that, or maybe you've had bad experiences with that. You've tried to articulate something and it always comes out bad, according to you. Well, if that's the case, well, practice it. Put it into another way. Be more precise with your speech. Dive deeper to find the words. The words are all there inside of you. Don't be intimidated by time pressures when you're communicating with someone. Take your time. One well-constructed sentence is better than 15 sentences that make no sense whatsoever, either to yourself or someone else. So discovery through expression, also part of learning, and obviously part of listening. And that's a different thing, listening to yourself.
That's something that I found listening to that tape from last week. I found that I couldn't understand every word I said.
Yeah. You mean when you listen back to yourself? Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's practice, Michael. Practice. It's practice. It's practice. Being able to articulate yourself. And the more you practice. Go on.
Sorry, I could hear what I was saying when it was played back to me, or when I played it back. I couldn't understand what I was saying.
Yeah. Go on.
Yeah, that was it. That was it. It was very hard to hear exactly what I was saying on the tape.
Right. Do you mean actually hear, like you couldn't hear properly, or you couldn't understand? You could hear it, but you couldn't understand what you were saying. Which one do you mean?
I could hear someone talking, but it was very hard to understand what they were saying, as in myself. That's what I'm talking about.
Right, right. Could you understand other people talking, other members in the class?
Yeah, quite clearly, yeah.
That's an interesting experience. I don't want to comment on that because maybe you could reflect on that and comment on that for us at a later time. I've had experiences where I've listened to myself back on a tape that I've been speaking to. In actual fact, I listened to those other tapes. And sometimes it doesn't even seem like me speaking. I'm thinking, well, wow, where did that come from? So I can relate to that, but you're saying something a bit different to that. So yeah, I don't know. I could just say with that, give it some thought and see what unfolds from that.
Yeah.
It's quite valid to ask yourself questions. But the thing is to be aware of too with that is that don't always expect an immediate answer. Sometimes answers come through different pathways during a day. So if you make the effort to ask yourself a question, meaning that you want the answer, pay attention for the rest of the day, or maybe even the week, but usually within a day. And the more sincerity there is associated with your question, it's almost like the universe will work with you to provide you some clarity on that. So that's a very powerful thing. That's my experience.
Yeah.
You're not listening. You're not hearing me. Now, my partner can hear me. She's in the next room making a cup of tea. So she may find this interesting, but, and I'm sure that all of us in relationships, someone has said that to you. You're not listening. They might say, you're not listening to me. Or they might just say, you're not listening. Or you're not hearing me. Anyone relate to that?
Definitely.
Yep.
Can you give us an example?
Yeah. You can hear me, but you're not listening to what I'm saying. The situation.
Yeah. Do you remember any specific examples, Michael?
No, there's probably too many to recount.
I find that
So,
interesting.
just in relation talking about emotions and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Mate.
Sometimes in my relationships, I have a pretty strong idea of how things are and how things should be, which is very dangerous, of course. And when that happens, when you have a strong idea in a relationship of how things should be, it's very difficult to actually be able to listen to the other person, and particularly if that other person hasn't, because it's usually an emotional situation. If someone blurts out one of those two lines, there's already emotions running through the conversation, as I'm sure you're all aware. So once that happens, then it becomes more difficult to articulate yourself, as we were just talking about then. So sometimes it can take years, and hopefully it's not too late, that if you're in a relationship that's important, that you do come to a point where you can actually listen to what the other person is saying and not force them in some ways to get to that point where they're having to blurt out, "You're not hearing me," or "You're not listening." So that's a skill, and there's some, we can, go into building those skills as well, which we've done in some role plays as well. Anyone else want to say anything else about that? Okay.
No, I'm good.
The joy of listening, the ability to listen, is a gift. Now, does anyone relate to that listening is a joy? Has anyone had an experience in their life where they found themselves listening and they could say it was an enjoyable experience?
Oh, definitely.
Can you give us an example?
A woman called Minnie, anyway, she's passed away now, but she sang a song in the 70s, and she had one of the most different ranges, and I think it was called I can't think what it was called.
Yeah.
But she reached really high notes and things like that. I can't think of the actual song, what name it is, but
that's all right.
Just things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, music. You're talking about music, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, music.
Yeah.
Same.
So there's an inherent joy in listening to music that you actually enjoy. So and if we can actually allow ourselves to partake of that, that's really interesting. And sometimes in our lives, this happened to me in my 30s, where I'd never listened to classical music in my life. I mean, I'm a child of the 70s, so rock and roll is king as far as I'm concerned. But a good close friend introduced me to classical music. So, and that was interesting, because that was sort of, and I wasn't aware of it at the time, it was an exercise in listening, because you're listening to something you've never listened to before, so it's difficult to even stay present. But when you allow yourself to do that, you start hearing things and experiencing things that are completely new. So you have to be patient with yourself, let's say, initially when something like that starts. And that was through music. So I found that quite interesting. And I still listen to classical music. The ability to listen is a gift. It's very, very true. As a human being, the amount of evolution that has happened for us, if you believe in evolution, to get to the ability where we can listen, and I mean, we can spend hours unpacking the intricacies of listening. We're not going to do that, but it's obvious that it is a gift, and the fact that you've got consciousness and the fact that you're breathing and you're alive, you have the ability to listen. So what I've written here is the company of truth. By the way, just some feedback. I've made these slides and I can see these slides clearly here at my end. Can you all see those words?
Yeah.
Can you, Brad, back there?
Yeah, I can see them, Mark.
You can read them?
Yep.
Okay, just checking. Company of truth, when what is being spoken is worth listening to, when all inner and outer background noise subsides, and what is being said resonates deeply or touches the heart, then each word becomes like a gulp of water when really thirsty. If you find yourself in that situation at any point in your life, that is an extraordinary thing. So anyone resonate with that or been able to, could say that they've found themselves in that position? I'm talking about speaking, not music in this sense.
Don't think so.
Don't think so?
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
No, go on.
I think there's times where I've had
Yeah.
speaking to different people and the words they've said has kind of touched home and touched heart and, you know, changed how I felt and changed how I thought.
Yeah. What about you, Brad? Resonate with any of that?
Yeah, I agree with what you said there.
Yeah. So hopefully, Graham, you'll be able to have that experience too. Because what actually happens when you have an experience like that, that all those 100 different thoughts you were talking about initially, they go away. They don't turn off, but they go to a place where they're not bothering you anymore. So, but many things have to line up for yourself to find yourself in that space, let's put it that way. And hopefully we're going to run out of time today for me to be able to play that little 15-minute thing, but I'll actually do that at the start of next week's class. So we can use that as an exercise in listening before we take on the next topic. So if you haven't found a space, something worth listening to yet, keep looking. Stay aware. You may be finding yourself right there, right now, at any particular point in time. So it's a beautiful experience. I've definitely experienced that. And it wasn't until I was nearly 30 where I came across something where that actually happened. It's quite revelatory when all of a sudden you've been living your whole life where you feel like you have to do a responsive dialogue. You have to be able to speak back. Someone's talking or someone's speaking, and there's always you formulating something or some other thought stream going on in your mind. To all of a sudden find yourself in a position where that stops. And what is being said touches your heart, literally. And you just find yourself in this space where you're just absorbing, you're drinking in every word, and you don't actually want it to stop. And there's a word for that. It's called company of truth. You're finding yourself in the company of truth. Hang in there. It's real. Okay. Go on. Did someone say something? No. I mean, someone. And we'll just go through this briefly. And I've sort of made, in response to Graham, because I knew Graham was finding it difficult to listen or struggling with listening in general. So here's some things. Now, these things that that unable to listen, especially when you need to listen. And mostly, if you want to move forward in life, you should be listening a lot. You need to listen a lot to what's going on, whether it's in a work sense, in a relationship sense, or just moving forward in your own life. You're learning a new skill and you've got a teacher or a mentor and they're teaching you, or a master in a class of some sort. Well, you need to be able to listen. Otherwise, you're wasting your time, you're wasting your money. So what are some of these things? Again, this is not about blaming. This is highlighting some of the things to think about and reflect upon for yourself. So why can't you listen? You're not interested. Brad said that before. Little openness or childlike curiosity. One of the aspects of mindfulness, they say, is to maintain an aspect of childlike curiosity. I mean, obviously that you're not you don't have a childlike curiosity to everything that's said. You know, you turn on the 6 o'clock news at night and it's just nonsense sometimes. Obviously it doesn't apply to everything, but you've got discrimination, so you can do that. Not relevant or important. Why? It may not be relevant or important to you, but it may be that you're too busy or that you think you know it all. We've all been here. Being Mr. and Mrs. Fix-It. I had to learn this when I'm in a relationship, and particularly when I'm working professionally. If you are constantly trying to fix someone, and this comes up in classes, I don't know if anyone was in the classes we've had there, when there were a few people in the class, people are either having sympathy or trying to fix someone else in the class. A, we don't like that, and B, we usually can't do that anyway. Someone has to sort that out themselves. Intoxicated medicators, we spoke about this in the health and nutrition class, neurotransmitters malfunctioning. We spoke about that last week. That has to do with many things. And of course, acquired habitual attitude of not listening, which incorporates all of those things above. An attitude is a thing that we acquire over a period of time that's sort of vague. So here I'm trying to unravel some of the aspects of an attitude that might be maintaining your inability to not listen. Not present. So if you're not present, like here in this class or somewhere else, where would you rather be, and why aren't you doing everything to get there? Just ask that question to yourself. Answer, I've got to do that. Answer may be that you don't know yourself fully yet, don't know how to feel comfortable in your own skin. No one has ever shown you how to be comfortable in your own skin, how to trust, how to be confident, how to be present. This is something that we can learn. Anyone can speak up, or I'm just going through these now just to finish off with these slides. But please speak up if you want to. Not present, bad habits, no care, enthusiasm, or effort to be present. Monkey mind, wandering mind. I've had one of those since I was at school. I was constantly looking out the window while the teacher was talking. So if you have monkey mind, if you see a monkey, that's what monkeys are, all over the place. Wandering mind is that your thoughts drift off. Well, you are listening to your thoughts while someone else is speaking in front of you, and you're off with your thoughts. One thing you have, as you're going to become more aware, your thoughts aren't always that useful. Sorry to be a harbour of bad news. This is my experience. They're either repetitive, they're going nowhere, or that's useful to you. It's a passive process. Often, they're not actually, your thoughts aren't always, of course they can be, aligned with what you're trying to achieve. Sometimes you can listen to someone and you can reflect. And in some ways that's thinking while they're speaking, but it's relevant and you're listening to what's going on while you're reflecting. Another superpower that we have. Jumping from one thing to another without any sense of completion, really important. Driven by quick pleasure or instant gratification. One of the things that separates us from many of the other animals, and don't get me wrong, I highly respect animals, but we can delay gratification. Some animals can do that as well. So that is a very advanced ability that we can hone, we can cultivate. And when we do that, we can be more present. Of course, again, we touched on this in the health and nutrition, not present. Why? You're physically uncomfortable, in pain, you're freezing. Someone's got the bloody air conditioner on and it's either too hot or too cold. you're fatigued, you're tired. You can't fight these things. You're hungry. Pain, fatigue, hungry, temperature, don't bother fighting it. You're not going to be fully present. So rather than make some superhuman, yogic, ascetic effort, change what's going on. Someone said something?
No, I yawned.
Ah, good. Mentally uncomfortable. Yawning is good. If you're fatigued, it brings more oxygen into your brain to help you be able to concentrate. Mentally uncomfortable, angry, depressed, anxious, or fearful. And Michael was talking a little bit about that before. It's very difficult to be present if something is making you anxious, or if you're scared of something. And maybe you've never thought of it like that. So if all these things are designed for us to reflect upon. So when you think about something you've never thought about, it's a way of looking at it more deeper and getting to the cause of things. So these things here, like mentally uncomfortable, angry, depressed, anxious, or fearful, is questions you might ask yourself if you're not able to be fully present. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Okay, cool. Stuff to reflect upon. I'll present these slides again in the recording. So if anyone wants to touch upon these again, you can go back and listen to it. So here's the interesting one, easily distracted. I think this is the last slide. In some ways, that's partly why I have started reading that book. I'm not exempt from being easily distracted. So easily distracted by our thoughts or old, habitual, unconscious inner dialogue. I know that's a whole big mouthful there, but that's like background noise, cockroaches scurrying around in the dark in your house. They've been there a long time. So some of that stuff, or presence of another person. So if Sam walked in the room right now, you guys would stop listening to me. Absolutely. And that's what they call a bottom-up distraction, meaning that you can't fight that. You'd have to be, again, very experienced not to be distracted by that. Or concerned about what others think of you. That's a big one, actually. So it's difficult to be present when you're thinking people are judging you. That's really powerful, really important. I had to, when I first started public speaking like I am now in front of a class 10 years ago, I'd never done it in my life before. And mate, I had to really, I was so concerned because in the first classes I had to speak amongst other peers, other professionals. So I was thrown in the deep end. I mean, thinking about what someone's is judging you and all of that stuff. It's very difficult. But as you let go of that, the concern of what people think about you, you just start becoming more comfortable in your own skin. And when you do that, you just start becoming more present. You can actually have more fun in the moment. And that's the reiteration of the slide about joy of listening, because that's really the essence of this class today. We are not going to be able to play that recording. So you guys okay if we do that next week? It's only 14 minutes.
Oh, Dan, we'll stay behind, won't we? Listen to him.
All right.
I'm only joking.
I think he's having a go at you there, Graham. I'm glad to see you guys are all getting on so well. This is fantastic. Any questions, any comments? Shall we leave that there?
Yeah,
Yeah, that's cool.
Happy.
Go have a coffee. Wake up.
Thank you, Brad. Awareness next Wednesday, and we'll start the class by just having that little talk. And Friday, those of you who want to come to the health and nutrition class, please come and Graham, Michael is giving a great presentation on magnesium.
Magnesium. Magnesium.
See
Okay,
you.
thank you.
Thanks, Hart.
See you later.
So, yeah,
See you, Graham. See you, Michael. Thanks a lot. Does someone let Samantha know that we finished, or does she just come down, get the computer?
Yeah, I would let her know. I just remember that name,
Yep,
Minnie Riverton.
Minnie
Nice.
Riverton.
Yeah,
I think-
R-I-P, G-O-N. And she used to sing a song called Loving You with a real high voice.
Right, right.
7.
I'm going to look it up. Minnie Riverton from the 70s.
She was in the 70s or 60s, the 70s.
Isn't
Yeah,
that isn't that interesting, Michael? That the more you relax, the more you feel comfortable with yourself, the more you're able to remember things as well. Have you noticed that?
Yeah, definitely.